Hi there, this is Phil with Phil Effects. Got another tutorial. Today, this is going to be part one of a two-part series on cameras. The part one that I'm going to discuss in this tutorial is basically setting up your cameras in Maya. And part two will be covering animating cameras in Maya. So let's go ahead and get started. In Maya, when you first open Maya up, it comes with four cameras that are presets. You have a perspective camera, a top, a front, and a side view camera. If we go and click over here, we can see this view here where you can see we have my perspective view. It's a little tough to see, but this is my side camera, this is my front camera, and this is my top camera. And we can see the cube that I've placed in here. And in just this window we see right here, it's really displaying the two types of cameras, camera types rather, that you have available to you in Maya. And that is a perspective camera and what's called an orthographic camera. Your top, front, and side view cameras are orthographic cameras. They're orthographic in that they don't show a perspective. Where this actually came from is in the CAD world. When you create CAD drawings, you may or may not have seen this, but a very common thing in CAD drawings is you create what's called orthoscopic views. So I've got an example here of a CAD drawing of, this is actually a pier for a telescope. And you can see in this CAD drawing, you have, in CAD they call it an isometric view, but you have a perspective view here on the side that shows what this item looks like. And here you have a top view, a front view, and a side view. This front view, you can see this beam right here going here, and that is this beam that goes this way. And then from the side view, you can see these two. If a camera was looking at it this way, it's going to see these two side views, and this is your side view right here. Note in this top, front, and side view, there's no perspective. You see the items and materials straight on as it would be. That's exactly what you see here. If we look, and let me put the let's go in our perspective view and go into wireframe view here. And with this wireframe view, using my perspective camera, if I take and I move this around so I'm looking pretty much straight on, as I zoom in, you can see the front and the back of this cube. All right, if we go into vertex mode, you can see the vertexes in the back and you can see the vertexes in the front. And it isn't unless I zoom out to an extremely long level that the lines essentially start to line up on top of each other, and I essentially lose my perspective. Obviously, at this scale, this is not something that is useful at all. But if we zoom in, this perspective camera acts like a real camera. Real cameras in the world, something that you would buy from Amazon, or a 35 millimeter camera or a movie camera. All real cameras are perspective cameras. This is how the real world works. Orthographic cameras are actually purely a mathematical entity. You can't go to the store and buy an orthographic camera, at least not to my knowledge. They don't exist, and it has to do with the way that light works and everything in the real world. So why would you have them? Well, the reason you have them, if we go back and we look at our fore view here, if we go in and we look at the side view, I'm looking at things and I see all my vertices lined up. And because nothing has moved and everything is lined up perfectly, we see it from exactly a side view. This is exactly what you want to have when you're modeling. If you're modeling from a reference image, you want to be able to see how things line up looking at your object from a side view, from a front view, and from a top view. For example, in this perspective view, let's go in and I'm going to take and I'm going to make a very slight adjustment to this one vertex, and I'm just going to move it a very tiny bit. All right. If I drop that, looking at it in this view, it's very difficult to see that I've actually moved this vertex. However, if we go into one of my views here, you can see in my front view If we zoom in fact, there are vertices that aren't lined up. And this is why you have this kind of orthographic view, because you can tell if things are not lined up perfectly. I can go and I can move this back, and I can take and I can put snapping on, so I can snap to a vertex, and oops, excuse me, I want to select just one of those, and we'll snap it back and snap it back. And so now I've been able to snap that back and place that exactly line on line with the vertice that's behind it, which is the whole reason for having this view. So I mentioned this, so when you create cameras, you can create a camera 90% of the time, 99% of the time probably, you're going to create a camera that is a perspective camera. Every now and then you may want to create a camera that's an orthographic camera. Sometimes I do that in modeling. You see here you have a top, front, and a side view. I may have images of an object that I want to model, and I not only have the images, but the object itself is very asymmetrical, and so the front and the back may look different. The left side and the right side might look different, and the top and the bottom might look different. So having only a top, front, and side orthographic cameras is somewhat limiting. If I'm using modeling with mapped image planes, I actually may want 3 more cameras. So I have a bottom camera. Instead of a side, I end up renaming these, so I have a right and a left side, and I have a front and a back. And so you end up with 6 orthographic cameras, so you get 6 different views for modeling your object. 9 times out of 10, usually 3 will do it, but every now and then you might have something where you really want to add a few more views, and the way you would do that is you'd create a camera, and it would be an orthographic camera. So how do we create cameras? All right, we've talked about the camera types, so how do we go in and create cameras? So you can do it a number of different ways. You can go to the rendering tab here, and I can just click on here and create a camera. This will default and create only the main kind of camera. If I want to create one of the other types of cameras, the best way to do it is you go to your create menu, go to camera here, and let me peel this off, and we can see that there are 3 main types and then some variations here. There is a camera aim, and a camera aim and up. Maya, in addition, supports 3D and stereo rigging, and so I can create stereo cameras and multi-stereo rigs. In this tutorial, I'm not going to talk about these. This gets quite complicated, and it's a rather sophisticated setup, but I think the most things that most people are interested in would be the camera aim, and camera aim and up. So let's go ahead and let's look at hit the box here so I can see my options for creating a camera. And off the top, I'm not going to cover every single one of these items. What I do want to do is cover the things that are probably of most interest, and the rest of these items may or may not be of interest to you. The best thing to do in that case is, if there's a particular parameter, is obviously the help files in Maya are quite good, and they can help you out with that. So let's go down and let's look at some of these things. So we have the lens property is the focal length of the camera. I'm set up in centimeters. This actually is in millimeters, so the focal length is 35. This would be like a 35 millimeter camera. This is one of the parameters that you would want. And the focal length of a camera in millimeters really relates to how you see the size of objects. So let's go through, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll walk through real quick what's on here, and then we'll create some cameras and we'll change some of these parameters so you can see what it is. So the focal length is the first thing that you may want to modify. Going down here, the horizontal and vertical film aperture. This is the size. Now the units here are actually in inches, and this would be the size. If you've got a new digital camera, this would be the size of the sensor. So this, and you can actually find this online, or you can get it from the information you have in your camera. So if you're trying to model a specific camera, like maybe a Nikon or a Canon camera, you can find the size of that image sensor, and this is where you would input that information. The next thing would be motion blur. If you're doing some animation and you want to add some motion blur, This is adjusted through a parameter called shutter angle. I'll talk a little bit about shutter angle in the future. The default is 144. Motion blur by default is turned off. It ends up being quite render intensive, but you enable this in the render settings when you want to render out. The other thing you may adjust might be your near and far clip planes. What this is how close the camera can see and how far a camera can see, and the units here are in Maya units. So the default is the camera can see as close as 1/10 of a Maya unit, and it can see as far out as 10,000. Usually for small scenes, this is fine. If you're modeling things that are in a real-world environment, such as buildings and architecture, and you're actually putting things together in meters and tens of meters and hundreds of meters, you may find that especially the far clip plane isn't near enough, and you need to increase this. This would manifest itself if you don't change this, in that you have a very big scene and you look through a camera, and you'll notice when you do a render that things in the background don't render. That's because the camera doesn't see it. You can quickly fix that by just going in and you change the units here in this far clipping plane. Orthographic use. This is where, if I wanted to create an orthographic camera, how I would do that. So I'd go in and I'd enable this, and now I'm creating an orthographic camera, not a perspective camera. The 2D pan and zoom is not something we need to handle or work with typically. Usually the defaults for what you're doing are fine. So let's go ahead and we'll create a camera. And this puts a camera in my scene. There's my camera. And let's pull this back a little bit. Turn on my point snapping. And let's go in and look at the camera shape. Now, when you look at the camera shape here and you look at the attributes here, there's actually quite a few more parameters that you can set than is in that initial opening. There's a few more when when you create the camera, you have more options in terms of the things that you can set. So let's go ahead, and I've got a scene, and let's open up my scene. So I'm going to take first this cube. We don't need this anymore, and I'm going to hide this cube with a Control H. And let's take my scene and let's enable that, and I'm going to enable my background and put this in here, and let's go ahead and look through this camera. So I'm going to take, in my view, I'm going to look through camera 1. That's the new camera that I just created. And we can look out through this scene. And we can see what we have here. So if we wanted to see how this renders, we can look at my render settings, and I have my render settings set up. At the moment, this is Maya 2015. Service Pack 1 extension, so I do have some color management going on. Just a couple other things on ray tracing. I'm set at 4, 4, and 8. My sample quality is really low. I want my renders to finish pretty quick. And I do have indirect lighting. I'm using image-based lighting in this scene to help out with the render. So let's go ahead and we'll do a quick render of this scene. Oops, I don't think I set my camera. Which camera did I get? That's standard cam. Let's look at camera 1, which is the one I just created. That's going to be very close to the same thing. So actually I'm looking at things from the back. You can see the way I have my directional light set. So let's take the scene and let's zoom the camera around here so I'm getting a little bit better illumination from the front. And I want to look right down these rows, because this is where I'm going to show you some of these different parameters and how varying them shows things. So here we have this. Let's do a render again. That's better. All right, so we can see I have things illuminated. We can see things going down this row. And this is the standard view from a standard 35mm camera. Now, if you're familiar with cameras, in particular the lenses on cameras, the way that things go in terms of the focal length, if I decrease this focal length, what happens is my field of view, the angle of field of view, that's how much of my picture am I going to see. If I decrease the focal length, it makes objects look smaller, but it increases my field of view. That would be what's equivalent to what's like a wide angle lens. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's, instead of 35, let's make this like 20. And you can see real quick, even without rendering, how that changed. And my field of view opened up, and things appear further back. All right, so if we go ahead and then change this to something like 200, which is the equivalent of a telephoto lens, all right, I zoom really in very tight, but notice now my angle field of view is at 10 degrees. So if we went back to 20, my field of view is almost 83 degrees. That's from this point, this whole angle right here between this field is about 84 degrees. And so I see more, all right, but things appear smaller. If we increase the focal length, I see less, but things appear bigger. And if we went ahead and did a render real quick, looking through that, you can see how that changes. Most cases, a lot of times just the standard 35mm is fine. What you may do to see things close up, you might zoom. You can actually zoom. This focal length is something that you can key, so you can select this, and I can left click on here and I can set a key. So if I wanted to, I could keyframe my focal length, and that's the way that you would get like a telephoto zoom in something that you were doing. Let's go back to 35 with that. Going down here, this camera aperture, this is the same thing both in inches and now here in millimeters as when I went up to create a camera. Let's look at this. This gets a little confusing the way they did this in Maya. If we go here and look at these options, so I have a camera selected here where it says the horizontal film aperture and the vertical film aperture is 1.4 and 0.994. That's this over here. Okay, in the attributes panel, they not only give it to you in inches, but they give it to you in millimeters. All right. If we go down and look at some of the other options, we have, you see here we have depth of field. We actually don't have that available to us over here, so you can't set the depth of field when you initially create the camera. One thing you do have, remember we had over here motion blur and they have shutter angle. When you have created a camera, the shutter angle is actually under what they call special effects. I don't know why they don't call this motion blur. They call it motion blur over here, but they call it special effects over here. So if you were interested in setting that parameter in the camera attribute panel, it's under shutter, it's under special effects. Over here, it's under motion blur. Let me close this. So let's go back, and I want to look at this depth of field. So let's enable this. And instantly you saw that my preview here got quite blurry. All right, and the depth of field is where things get focused. In a real camera, this has to do with what's called an f-stop, and that's the size of the aperture, the hole essentially in the front of a camera that's letting light into a camera. If you have an f-stop number that's low, like f2, you have a very narrow depth of field. Now what that means in a real camera is the hole actually is quite large. So it's letting a lot of light into a camera. Now for the cameras in Maya, the aperture really is not something that's a parameter that you're interested in or that matters, because it's a mathematical kind of camera. But that depth of field of view is important. And so if we want to change our depth of field of view, we do this here with f-stop. Now, one of the things you need to set first off is this focal distance. This focal distance is the distance from the camera to a specific object. Well, there's a quick way to find out how far objects are in your field of view. And we go up here and we go to display and heads up display. And if I click this, object details, let's go ahead and click that. Over here, you see this distance from camera. So I'm going to go ahead and I have some objects here, and I'm going to select some objects, and the distance, oh shoot, with the background, I know what I need to do. Alright, hold on here. Okay. My background was white, and unfortunately I have white text on white, so I couldn't see that. So let's select this row. Alright, so we have this row selected in the back. And here you can see this distance from camera. So the distance from the camera is 42.7. So row 8 is 42.7. Row 3, see this is a little closer. Row 3, the distance from our camera is 20. Now the units here, these are Maya units. So this row of highlighted blocks here is 20.2 units from the camera. All right, so if I want these to be in focus, I need to set my distance of focus at 20.2. So let's go over here to my camera. And my focus distance at the moment was 5. So let's set that to 20. And notice, bingo, all right, all of a sudden on our display here, these came into focus. And you can see things further back are not in focus and things closer are not in focus. If we go over here and we do a render on this real quick, forgive the noise. Again, I have my interpolation turned down so we get a quick render, but you can see right in here things are in focus, things further in the background are out of focus, and things that are up close are out of focus. So we're getting that depth of field effect right here. And again, the key to this is just figuring out how far things are from your camera, and so you want to set this focus distance to how far it is. If I set my f-stop really low, things get really narrow. In fact, it gets so narrow that my field of my focus is really just on this one plane. I set this down to f2. If we open up this out to like 50, notice how clear everything in the scene got. So what is happening, if this was a real camera, an f-stop of 54 would be really, really small. What would happen is you've got an extremely small hole letting light into the camera. But what that means is you have the ability to focus on things very close and focus on things very far. If we again crank that way down, we change that depth of focus. We can make things vary by focusing that focus distance. So in other words, if I went in and changed this focus distance first from, let's say, 10, I have things up front, and if I took this and changed it to 50, now I have things focused way in the back. So you can see that if you keyframe this focus distance, you can get some animated depth of field, some interesting things that you can do in animating the focus, the depth of field of view, by just animating this focus distance. One of the last things I want to talk about in terms of camera setup is environment. Alright, so at the moment I'm using image-based lighting to set my environment. Let me take that and go into my render settings, and I'm going to delete that. So we have image-based lighting is turned off, and we'll go ahead and do a render. And my background looks black. The reason the background looks black black in Maya is the default for the background color of a camera is black. This is where that background is. I'm going to turn this depth of field off. This is where this black background on my render comes from. It comes from the camera setup itself. It doesn't have to be that way. I could crank this up and I can make that white. And let's click on here and render again. And now my rendered background is white. It's actually a good idea to leave it at black, because this reminds you, by leaving it black, that you haven't lit your scene yet. And so the fact that you've got a black background is a good reminder to you that, hey, you got to add some lights to your scene. But you're not restricted to that. And in fact, you're not even restricted to black and white. You can go crazy, and we could go in here and make the background yellow if you wanted to. And we do a quick render, and now I have a yellow background. I'm not sure I'd recommend that, but you certainly can do it. So these are the basic things, I think, in terms of setup, the things that are most important to you when you're setting up a camera, and how you create that. When we come back with the next tutorial, what I want to do is we will talk about the camera and aim, and the camera aim and up, because these relate to animating, and we'll also animate the standard camera. So this has been Phil with PhilFX, and thanks again, and catch me up on part 2.